The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind. Not the quiet you feel early in the morning before the world wakes up. This was the kind of silence that presses against your ears, heavy and intentional, like something had been decided without you. It was a Wednesday evening in early December when I realized I had been erased again. I was standing in my kitchen in Asheville, North Carolina, rinsing a mug that had gone cold in my hands. Outside, the mountains were already dark, the winter sky settling in early. My phone lay face up on the counter screen, glowing with notification after notification. Photos, group texts, laughter captured in little blue bubbles. Christmas planning. Not one message was addressed to me. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and picked up the phone, scrolling back slowly, my stomach tightening with each swipe. There it was. A group chat titled Family Christmas 2023, created 3 weeks ago. My parents, my younger sister, my older brother, even my cousin Claire, who lived 3 states away. Everyone but me. For a moment, I thought it had to be a mistake, a glitch, something accidental. I told myself that because it hurt less than the truth. My name is Rebecca Monroe. I am 32 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the one who existed just outside the frame. The dependable one. The quiet one. The one who never caused trouble and therefore never needed attention. The forgotten one. I scrolled through the messages I was never meant to see. My mother posting links to matching pajamas. My sister Lily complaining about flight times. My father chiming in about the guest list for Christmas Eve dinner. My brother Mark joking about who would carve the turkey. And then Lily wrote something that made my breath catch. Should we tell Rebecca or just keep it small this year? My mother replied almost immediately. Let's not stir things up. You know how sensitive she gets. Sensitive. I set the phone down slowly as if it might bite me. The truth was, I had known something like this was coming. It always did. Every holiday, every milestone, every family moment that mattered somehow slid past me while I stood politely on the sidelines, smiling like it didn't hurt. But this time was different. This time it wasn't just a dinner. It wasn't just Christmas. This time it was a wedding. I found out 2 days later the way I always found out about things that mattered in my family. Through Facebook. A mutual friend had commented under Lily's engagement photo something cheerful and careless. Can't wait for the spring wedding. Your whole family must be so excited. Spring wedding. I stared at the screen, my pulse loud in my ears. Lily had gotten engaged, planned a wedding, chosen a season, and no one had told me. I clicked her profile, my fingers trembling just slightly. There it was, buried under curated smiles and filtered joy. A photo of Lily and her fiancé standing in front of our childhood home, her left hand lifted just enough to show the ring. The caption read, "Forever starts now, surrounded by love." I felt something crack open in my chest. Surrounded by love. I was her sister. I had held her hair back when she was sick, lent her money when she couldn't make rent, driven 6 hours overnight when she called crying over a breakup that never lasted. And now I was invisible. I didn't call her, I didn't text. I waited. Because part of me still believed that if I stayed quiet, if I stayed good, they would remember me on their own. They didn't. Weeks passed. Christmas came and went without an invitation. I spent it alone, wrapped in a blanket on my couch, watching snowfall outside while my family posed for photos in matching pajamas I'd seen in that group chat. Then came the wedding announcement. Formal invitations. Cream-colored envelopes. Elegant script. I saw them again on social media, laid out on my parents' dining table, my mother proudly tagging relatives. 100 guests, venues, caterers, bridesmaids. My name was nowhere. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not anger, not yet. It was clarity. Because exclusion, when repeated enough times, stops feeling accidental. It starts feeling strategic. I finally called my mother that night. Her voice was warm, practiced as if she hadn't spent months pretending I didn't exist. "Oh, Rebecca," she said lightly. "We didn't think you'd want to be involved. You've been so busy with work." Busy. I worked 2 jobs. I paid my own way. I had never once asked them for anything. "I wasn't invited," I said quietly. There was a pause, just long enough to tell me everything. "Well," she replied, "we didn't want any tension. Lily deserves a perfect day." And there it was. The pattern named out loud. My presence was considered tension. My absence was peace. I hung up without arguing, without crying, because for the first time I wasn't confused. I was paying attention. What they didn't know was that while they were planning a wedding built on curated happiness, I was about to uncover something they had spent years burying. A will. A business. A truth that would turn their perfect story inside out, and they would never see it coming, not until the tables finally turned. I didn't sleep much after that call, not because I was replaying my mother's words, but because something older had been stirred awake. A quiet inventory of memories began lining themselves up in my head, each one suddenly clearer, now that I was no longer trying to excuse them. Exclusion had never been sudden, it had been practiced. I lay on my couch in the dark, the glow from the street lamp outside, cutting a thin line across the ceiling, and let myself remember without correcting the story to make it hurt less. The first time I noticed the pattern, I was 9 years old. It was Thanksgiving at my grandmother Eleanor's house in Lexington, Kentucky. The dining table was long and polished, set with china she only brought out once a year. There were name cards at each place, handwritten in her careful cursive. I searched for mine. I found it at the end of the table, tucked next to the folding chair. The kids' end, even though I was the same age as Lily, who sat between our parents at the center. When I asked why, my mother smiled and said, "You don't mind, sweetheart? You're easy." Easy. That word would follow me my entire life. At 16, when Lily totaled my car and my parents blamed me for letting her borrow it. At 21, when Mark announced his engagement at my college graduation dinner and everyone forgot why we were there. At 28, when my birthday passed without a call, but Lily's promotion was celebrated with a full weekend trip. Each time I swallowed the ache and told myself I was being dramatic. Each time they reinforced the idea that harmony mattered more than fairness and silence mattered more than truth. I had learned early that if I spoke up, I became the problem. If I stayed quiet, I became invisible. And invisibility, I told myself, was safer. That illusion shattered completely the week after the wedding invitations went out. I was at work, sitting in my small shared office at a local architecture firm, when my phone buzzed with a message from my cousin Natalie. "Hey," she wrote. "I hope this isn't awkward, but are you going to Lily's wedding?" I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. "No," I typed back. "I wasn't invited." There was a long pause, then 3 dots. "What? That doesn't make sense. Your mom told everyone you couldn't come because of work." I closed my eyes. So they hadn't just excluded me, they had rewritten me. I asked Natalie to send me a photo of the seating chart she'd seen at my parents' house. When it arrived, my hands shook. Round tables labeled with family names: parents, siblings, cousins. A seat for Lily's college roommate. A seat for a childhood neighbor we hadn't seen in 10 years. No seat for me. Not even a placeholder. That night, I poured a glass of wine and sat at my kitchen table, the chair across from me empty. I didn't cry. I didn't rant. I did something far more dangerous. I stopped defending them. I began to ask questions. About the business. About my grandfather's company. About why, when he died, everything had gone to my father without discussion, even though I remembered my grandmother once saying she wanted me to be protected. At the time, I had assumed she meant emotionally. Now I wasn't so sure. I started small. Public records, old articles, financial filings, things most people never bothered to look up. The Monroe Tool Company had been founded by my grandfather Harold Monroe decades earlier. It was modest but profitable, specializing in precision components for agricultural equipment. When he passed, my father took over as CEO. What caught my attention was not what was there, but what was missing. There was no record of succession planning, no updated ownership disclosures, no mention of the trust my grandmother had referenced casually once years ago, when she pressed a folded napkin into my hand at Sunday dinner and whispered, "You're different, Becky. Don't let them make you forget that." I had laughed it off then. Now the memory landed differently. I called my grandmother's old attorney the next morning. His receptionist told me he had retired, but she gave me the name of the firm that had taken over his files. That was when my phone rang. Lily. Her voice was bright, almost giddy. "Hey, sis, I hear you've been asking questions." My stomach tightened. Questions about what? There was a pause, not accidental, measured. About the company, about Grandma. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the office printer suddenly too loud. "Am I not allowed to?" She laughed softly. "It's just weird timing. You know how stressful wedding planning is. Mom's worried you're stirring things up." "By existing," I asked. She sighed. "You always take things personally." That sentence landed with surgical precision. "I wasn't invited," I said evenly. Another pause. "We didn't think you'd be comfortable," she replied. "It's a big event. Lots of people." "I'm your sister." "I know," she said quickly, "but this is my moment." There it was. Her moment. As if moments were finite and mine had already been spent. After we hung up, I sat in my car for a long time, watching the reflection of my face in the rearview mirror. I looked older than 32. Tired in a way sleep didn't fix, But beneath the exhaustion, something else was forming. Resolve. I realized then that this was not about a wedding. It was about erasure. About who was allowed to take up space in our family and who was expected to disappear quietly so others could shine. And for the first time, I understood something my grandmother had known all along. They didn't ignore me because I was weak. They ignored me because I was inconvenient, because I asked questions, because I remembered things they preferred to forget. And now, as I waited for a call back from a law firm that held decades of my family's secrets, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. If they had gone to this much effort to cut me out of a celebration, they would go to even greater lengths to keep me away from the truth, which meant the truth was worth finding. And when I did, it would not be quiet. It would be undeniable. The call came 3 days later, just after sunrise. I was standing in my kitchen barefoot on the cold tile, staring out the window at a thin line of fog clinging to the mountains. My coffee hadn't finished brewing yet when my phone vibrated against the counter. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. "This is Rebecca Monroe," I said, my voice still rough with sleep. "Ms. Monroe." A woman replied, calm and professional. "My name is Judith Keller. I'm an attorney with Keller and Walsh. You contacted our office regarding the estate of Eleanor Monroe." My grip tightened on the phone. "Yes," I said. "Thank you for calling me back." There was a pause, the faint sound of papers shifting. "Before we proceed, I need to ask you something directly. Are you aware that there may be more than one version of your grandmother's will?" The kitchen seemed to tilt slightly. "No," I said slowly. "I was told everything went to my father." Another pause, longer this time. "That is the version that was submitted to probate," Judith said carefully. However, during a routine audit connected to recent corporate filings, another document surfaced. One that raises questions. Questions. My heart was pounding now, loud enough that I was sure she could hear it. "What kind of questions?" I asked. "About intent," she replied, "and about omission." I sat down at the small table by the window, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "She asked me to reach out to you," Judith continued, "because your name appears in the later document." For a moment I couldn't speak. Not because I was shocked, because somewhere deep down a part of me had been waiting for this confirmation my entire life. "What does it say?" I finally asked. "We should discuss that in person," she said. "There are legal implications, and I want to be very clear. But I can tell you this. Your grandmother made changes to her estate plan less than a year before she passed." I thought of the last Christmas I'd spent with Eleanor. She had been quieter than usual, watching conversations instead of steering them. At the time, I'd assumed it was age. Now I wondered what she had seen. "When can we meet?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning," Judith replied, "if that works for you." It did. I barely slept that night. Memories kept surfacing, uninvited and insistent. My grandmother slipping me extra cash when my parents weren't looking, telling me to save it, not spend it on anyone else. The way she'd asked about my work, my plans, my independence, while the rest of the family treated those things like trivia. She had known. The law office sat in a converted brick house near downtown Asheville, the kind of place that still smelled faintly of old paper and lemon polish. Judith Keller was in her early 60s, silver hair pulled into a low bun, eyes sharp without being unkind. She didn't waste time. She slid 2 documents across the table. "This," she said, tapping the first, "is the will your father submitted." I glanced at it. Familiar names, my father, my aunt, standard language. "And this," she continued, placing the second document beside it, "is the later version. Signed, notarized, and dated 8 months after the first." My breath caught. My name was there. Not buried in fine print, not mentioned as an afterthought. "Primary beneficiary?" I stared at the page, the words blurring slightly. "What does this mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "It means," Judith said, "that your grandmother intended for you to inherit the majority of her estate, including her personal residence, the family trust, and controlling shares of Monroe Tool Company." The room went very quiet. "I don't understand," I said. "Why wasn't this used?" Judith folded her hands. "Because the later will was never submitted." "Why not?" "Because the person in possession of it chose not to," she replied evenly. My chest tightened. "My father?" "Yes," she said. "And your mother was present when the document was signed." The words landed with devastating clarity. They hadn't forgotten me. They had erased me. Judith continued. "Your grandmother included a letter with the revised will. It outlined her concerns about favoritism, financial recklessness, and her fear that you would be left unprotected." Tears burned behind my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. "Do they know that I know?" I asked. "No," Judith said. "Not yet. The question is how you want to proceed." I thought of the wedding invitations, the Christmas silence, the lies told casually to keep the peace. I want the truth acknowledged, I said. Legally. Judith nodded. Then we filed to reinstate the later will. Be aware this will not be quiet. I'm done being quiet, I replied. The fallout began faster than I expected. That evening, my mother called. Her tone was syrupy, almost cheerful. Rebecca, honey, Judith Keller called your father today. Something about paperwork. I said nothing. She said there might be confusion about your grandmother's will, my mother continued. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. Is it, I asked? Silence, then sharper now. Why are you digging into this? Because you buried it, I thought. Because it involves me, I said aloud. My father took the phone. This is unnecessary, he said flatly. Your grandmother was confused near the end. We did what was best for the family. You did what was best for you, I replied. You're being manipulated, he snapped. No, I said calmly, I'm finally reading. The line went dead. The next day, Lily texted me. What are you doing? Mom is crying nonstop. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back, I'm telling the truth. Her reply came instantly. You're ruining everything. I set the phone down. Outside, the fog had lifted, revealing the mountains in sharp, undeniable detail. For the first time, I saw my family the same way. Not as misunderstood, not as complicated, but as people who had made a choice, and now that choice was about to cost them far more than a perfect wedding. Because the moment you stop accepting erasure, you force everyone else to confront what they've done. And I was done disappearing. Once the paperwork was filed, there was no going back. Judith warned me it would feel like pulling a thread from an old sweater. One tug, and everything would start to unravel, whether anyone was ready or not. I didn't fully understand what she meant until the calls started coming in waves. Not angry at first, confused, concerned, performative. My Aunt Susan called me the morning after the filing. Her voice was soft, almost maternal, as if we hadn't spoken in years. Rebecca, sweetheart, she said, your father is beside himself. This whole thing is tearing the family apart. I looked out my office window at the bare branches swaying in the cold wind. I didn't tear anything apart, I said. I asked for the truth. She sighed. Sometimes the truth doesn't need to be dug up. Some things are better left alone. For who, I asked. She didn't answer. By noon, my cousin Natalie texted again. They're telling everyone you're contesting Grandma's will out of spite, that you're angry about the wedding. I felt a tight, bitter laugh rise in my chest. So that was the narrative. Not justice, not inheritance, pettiness. She was confused, my father told anyone who would listen. Rebecca's always been sensitive. This is just her acting out. That word again. Sensitive. I remembered being called sensitive when I cried because Lily borrowed my clothes without asking. Sensitive when I pointed out that my promotion had been ignored while Mark's new car was celebrated. Sensitive when I asked why my birthday dinner had been rescheduled twice and then forgotten entirely. Sensitive had never meant emotional. It had meant inconvenient. Judith called me late that afternoon. They've retained counsel, she said. They're going to argue undue influence. They'll claim your grandmother was pressured. By me, I said. Yes, Judith replied, specifically. The audacity of it made my hands shake. I lived 3 hours away, I said. I visited once a month. Meanwhile, my parents handled her finances. They took her to appointments. They controlled access. I know, Judith said calmly. And so does the court, but they're trying to control the story. That night, Lily showed up at my apartment without calling. I opened the door and barely recognized her. Her hair was pulled back tightly, face pale, eyes sharp with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite fear. You have no idea what you're doing, she said the moment she stepped inside. I closed the door behind her. Actually, I do. She paced my living room, hands flying. Mom can't sleep. Dad's blood pressure is through the roof. And now people are talking. At the club, at church, they're asking questions. I crossed my arms. Good. She stopped pacing and stared at me. You're enjoying this. I shook my head. No, I'm done pretending it didn't hurt. Her voice cracked. You couldn't just let me have my wedding. That sentence hit harder than anything else. I looked at her, really looked. The sister I had protected, covered for, lent money to. The sister who never once noticed I was missing. You didn't just take the wedding from me, I said quietly. You took the family. That's not fair, she snapped. No, I replied, it's accurate. She sank onto the couch, suddenly deflated. Grandma wouldn't have wanted this. I thought of Eleanor's careful handwriting. The letter Judith had read aloud. The words about protection and favoritism. She did want this, I said. She just didn't trust you with it. Tears welled in Lily's eyes, but there was something else there too. Fear. If the will goes through, she said slowly, everything changes. Yes, I said, it already has. She stood abruptly. You're selfish. I felt the old instinct rise, the urge to apologize, to smooth things over. I let it pass. If standing up for myself makes me selfish, I said, then I accept that. She left without another word. 2 days later, the official response from my parents' attorney arrived. They claimed Eleanor lacked capacity, that I manipulated her, that the later will was the result of emotional coercion. Judith forwarded me the document with one sentence. They are lying and they know it. I read the accusation slowly, my jaw tightening. They painted me as unstable, estranged, resentful. They erased decades of quiet obedience and replaced it with a convenient villain. For the first time, I felt anger sharpen into something clean and focused. Not rage, resolve. I remembered sitting at the kids' table at Thanksgiving, standing alone on Christmas mornings, watching my family pose for photos I wasn't invited into. They had spent years rewriting reality to suit them. Now they were doing it on paper. Judith called again that evening. The court date is set, she said. 3 weeks from now. Good, I replied. You understand, she added, this will all come out. Financial decisions, transfers, who knew what and when. I smiled for the first time in days. They should have thought about that before they lied. That night I stood in my kitchen long after midnight, the house quiet around me. I thought about the wedding venue being finalized, the seating chart printed, my absence carefully engineered. They believed exclusion was harmless. They believed silence was submission. They believed I would swallow it like always. What they didn't understand was that every time they cut me out, they taught me how to survive without them. And now, as the truth gathered momentum, they were about to learn something I had learned the hard way. When you build your life on lies, it only takes one person refusing to play along for everything to collapse. The first thing I lost was my job. Not because I was incompetent, not because I failed, because I became inconvenient. 2 days after the court date was set, my manager asked me to step into the conference room. The glass walls made everything feel exposed like a fishbowl. I already knew what was coming by the way she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Rebecca, she began folding her hands carefully. We've received some concerns. I waited. Your father reached out to one of our board members, she continued. He expressed worries about your emotional state, suggested that personal issues might be affecting your judgment. There it was. The family narrative had crossed into my professional life. I've never missed a deadline, I said evenly. My performance reviews are clean. She nodded quickly. Yes, absolutely. This isn't about performance. It's about optics. Optics. The word people use when they don't want to say power. They think you're unstable, she said quietly. And frankly, we can't afford distractions right now. I packed my desk that afternoon into a cardboard box that smelled faintly of toner and dust. No one said goodbye. A few colleagues avoided my gaze. One slipped me a note that said, I'm sorry. I don't believe them. I walked out into the cold December air feeling hollow but strangely steady. They had escalated. So would I. That night, Judith called me with an update that explained everything. Your parents have been moving money, she said, quietly, out of accounts tied to the company. It looks like they're preparing for a loss. So they're bleeding it dry, I said. Yes, she replied, and that's not all. There's evidence they did this before your grandmother passed. I closed my eyes. The inheritance wasn't just about favoritism. It was about control. For decades, my parents had treated the company like a private safety net, dipping into it whenever they needed to prop up appearances. My grandmother had seen it, documented it, tried to stop it. And when she did, they buried her final wishes. They're scared, Judith said. And scared people get sloppy. The next blow came from an unexpected direction. My brother Mark finally called. We hadn't spoken since the wedding announcement when he sent me a single text that read, Don't make this harder than it has to be. Now his voice was low tight. You're destroying everything Dad built, he said without preamble. Dad didn't build it, I replied. Grandpa did. That doesn't matter, he snapped. This is about loyalty. I laughed, a sharp sound that surprised even me. Loyalty to who? To family, he said. No, I corrected. Loyalty to power. Silence. Then colder now, you've always been jealous. I felt something finally let go inside me. No, I said, I was invisible. You just never noticed because you benefited from it. He hung up. That night I cried for the first time since this began. Not loud, dramatic sobs, just quiet tears slipping down my face as I sat on the floor of my apartment back against the couch surrounded by half-packed boxes of a life I was being pushed out of. I mourned the family I never had. The parents who chose convenience over courage. The siblings who learned early that stepping over me was easier than standing beside me. And when the tears stopped, I felt something else settle in. Freedom. The next morning, Judith forwarded me an email marked urgent. Anonymous tip submitted to the state regulator. My stomach tightened as I opened it. Someone had reported financial irregularities at Monroe Tool Company. Shell transfers. Personal expenses billed as corporate costs, missing documentation. It wasn't me. I didn't need to do it. The truth had its own momentum now. Within days, an audit was announced. My father called me again, this time frantic. "You did this," he said. "You went to the authorities." "I didn't," I replied calmly. But someone finally looked. "You're ruining us," he shouted. "No," I said quietly. "Your choices did that." The wedding was 2 weeks away. And suddenly everything about it shifted. Vendors began calling with questions. Deposits were frozen. The venue requested additional assurances. My mother stopped posting updates. The illusion was cracking. Lily texted me late one night. "If you drop the case, this all stops." I stared at the message, my heart pounding. This was the bargain. My silence in exchange for their survival. I typed back slowly. "No." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "You're really going to let this happen?" I set the phone down without replying. Because here was the truth I had finally learned. They had never protected me. Why should I keep protecting them? As the days ticked closer to the wedding, I felt the weight of being cast as the villain settle into something solid and unmovable. They would blame me. They would curse my name. They would tell this story for years, painting me as the daughter who betrayed them. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of that role. Because villains at least are remembered. And I was done being erased. The wedding was 10 days away when my mother finally stopped pretending. She didn't call first, she showed up. I was halfway through packing another box when I heard the knock. Not hesitant, not polite. The kind of knock that assumes the door will open because it always has. When I opened it, she stood there in her wool coat and pearl earrings, posture rigid, lips pressed thin. No greeting, no hug, no pretense. "We need to talk," she said. I stepped aside without answering. She walked into my apartment like she owned it, eyes scanning the half-empty shelves, the boxes stacked against the wall. Her gaze lingered on the absence, as if she were finally noticing how much of my life had been unsupported. "What is all this?" she asked. "I'm moving," I said. Her head snapped toward me. "Because of this mess." "Because of clarity," I replied. She turned sharply, anger flashing. "You've gone too far, Rebecca. Vendors are backing out. Your father is under investigation. Lily can barely function." "Lee." I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You should have thought about that before you lied." Her face hardened. "We did what we had to do." "To protect yourselves," I said. "To protect the family," she snapped. I met her gaze. "Those are not the same thing." She scoffed. "You always see things in extremes." "No," I said quietly. "I see patterns." Her voice softened suddenly, shifting tactics the way she always did when force failed. "You've always been strong. Independent. You didn't need us the way Lily did." There it was again, the excuse that had justified every neglect. "So you took from me because I wouldn't fall apart without you," I said. "That's not fair," she said quickly. "It's accurate," I replied. Her eyes flicked away. For just a second, I saw something like guilt. Then it vanished. "If you go through with this," she said, "you will lose your family." I felt a strange calm settle over me. "I already did," I said. She stared at me as if I'd struck her. "You're being cruel," she said. I shook my head. "I'm being honest." She stepped closer, voice low and urgent. "You don't understand what people will say. About you. About us." I almost laughed. "For years I said you cared more about what people said than what I felt. I'm done paying that price." She straightened her face, closing off. "Then I hope it's worth it." "It is," I said. "For the first time it is." She left without another word. I closed the door and stood there for a long time, my heart pounding, my hands steady. I waited for the guilt to crash over me like it always had. It didn't. Instead, I felt something unfamiliar. Relief. 2 days later, Judith called with news that confirmed what I already sensed. "The audit has expanded," she said. "They found evidence of long-term misuse. This is no longer just a civil matter." I closed my eyes. "What does that mean?" "It means your father's decisions are being examined personally," she replied. "And it means the wedding funds are officially frozen." I pictured Lily's meticulously planned tables, the flowers, the favors, the illusion of perfection she had clung to. This was the cost of building a life on borrowed stability. That evening, Lily called again. Her voice was raw this time, stripped of entitlement. "I can't sleep," she said. "Everything is collapsing." I listened. "They're saying the wedding might be postponed," she continued. Do you know what that does to me? I thought of Christmases spent alone, birthdays forgotten, invitations that never came. Yes, I said, I do. She sniffed. I never meant to hurt you. You never meant to see me, I replied. Silence. Then quietly, if you would just talk to Dad. If you'd say something. I closed my eyes. This was the moment I had lived for my entire life. The moment where they asked me to fix it, and for the first time I said no. I'm not your shield anymore, I said. I warned you, all of you. Her voice broke. So that's it? Yes, I said. That's it. After we hung up, I sat on my floor surrounded by boxes and thought about forgiveness. About how often I had been expected to offer it without apology, without acknowledgement, without change. Forgiveness, I realized, had been used as a leash. They called it grace. It was control. The next morning, I signed the final paperwork authorizing Judith to proceed fully. No delays, no compromises. When the court date confirmation arrived, I didn't feel fear. I felt grounded. Outside, winter had begun to loosen its grip. The mountains were still bare, but there was a hint of something coming. Renewal, maybe. Or just honesty. I packed the last box that afternoon. Inside it, I placed the letter from my grandmother that Judith had shared with me. The one where Eleanor wrote, I worry they do not see you. I do. I always have. I taped the box shut carefully. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting to be forgiven for existing. I was choosing myself without apology. And somewhere between the frozen wedding plans and the unraveling lies, I understood the truth of what was happening. This wasn't revenge. It was the end of a long silence. The morning of the wedding arrived anyway. Not with music or laughter or excitement, but with tension so thick it felt like weather. I woke before dawn in my half-empty apartment, the air cold, the light gray. For a moment, I forgot what day it was. Then my phone lit up. Missed calls, texts, notifications piling on top of one another like they were afraid to be ignored. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I made coffee and stood by the window watching the city wake up. Somewhere across town, my sister was putting on a white dress she had chosen months earlier, believing it would mark the beginning of a perfect life. Somewhere, my parents were rehearsing smiles, hoping no one would ask the wrong questions. And somewhere deep inside me, something settled into place. I was not going. They had made that decision for me long ago. The wedding venue was a restored estate just outside town, all white columns and manicured lawns. I knew this because photos began appearing on social media before noon. Guests arriving, floral arches, carefully framed angles that hid the cracks underneath. What didn't appear were the things no one wanted to explain: the missing vendors, the reduced guest list, the hushed conversations happening just out of frame. By early afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from Natalie. They cut the guest list almost in half, she wrote. People are whispering, something's wrong. I set the phone down. I had warned them months ago, quietly, clearly. They had chosen denial over truth. At 2 p.m, Judith called. They've delayed the ceremony, she said. Officially, it's a technical issue. Unofficially, the accounts tied to the wedding expenses are frozen. I closed my eyes. This was the moment. Not the explosion, not the chaos. The pause. The uncomfortable stillness where everyone realizes the script is gone and no one knows what comes next. An hour later, Lily called. I almost didn't pick up. Almost. Her voice was shaking. Rebecca, please. The sound of it cracked something open in me. Not pity, recognition. I can't do this, she said. They're asking questions. People are leaving. The planner won't stop pacing. I said nothing. Mom says you're behind this, she continued, desperation bleeding through her words. Dad won't even look at me. Still, I didn't interrupt. You didn't want to come, she said suddenly, as if saying it might make it true. You said you were busy. No, I replied calmly. You said that for me. Silence. Then quieter now, I didn't think it would go this far. I did, I said. She sobbed then openly without restraint. The sound echoed through the phone, raw and real in a way I had never heard from her before. For a moment, the old instinct surged, the need to comfort, to fix, to step in and absorb the damage so she wouldn't have to. I breathed through it. I need you, she said. The words hung there. I thought of every time I had needed her and been met with indifference. Every time my absence had been explained away instead of questioned. I needed you too, I said softly. For years. She didn't answer. The line went dead. At 4 p.m, the wedding was officially postponed. No announcement. No explanation. Just guests leaving early, murmuring into their phones, avoiding eye contact. Social media went quiet, as if the silence might erase what everyone had already seen. By evening, the story had shifted. From celebration to speculation, from joy to curiosity. People noticed when perfection cracked. Judith called again just after sunset. The court expedited the review, she said. The judge is concerned about the financial behavior surrounding the estate. They want answers sooner rather than later. I leaned against the counter, my reflection faint in the dark window. When I asked, next week, she replied. This is moving faster than expected. I smiled faintly. So was the truth. That night, my parents called together. I didn't answer. They left a voicemail instead. My father's voice was strained. This has gone far enough. You've humiliated us. My mother's followed, brittle with emotion. Do you have any idea what this has done to your sister? I listened to the end. Then I deleted the message. Because humiliation is what happens when lies are exposed, not when truth is spoken. I went to bed early, exhausted in a way that felt earned. As I drifted towards sleep, one thought kept repeating. This wedding was never about love. It was about image. Control. Appearances held together by money and silence. And the moment the money froze and the silence broke, there was nothing left to stand on. I slept deeply that night. For the first time since all of this began, I wasn't bracing for impact. I was ready, because whatever came next, I would meet it without apology. The day after the wedding collapsed, the silence changed. Before it had been defensive, avoidant, a collective refusal to look too closely at what was happening. Now it was investigative. People were asking questions out loud. I woke to a dozen missed notifications, not from my family this time, but from acquaintances, distant relatives, even former coworkers who suddenly remembered my name. Is everything okay with your family? I heard something happened at the wedding. Wasn't your grandfather's company involved in some kind of audit? I didn't respond. I didn't need to. By mid-morning, the local business journal published a short article. Nothing dramatic, just facts. Monroe Tool Company under review. Financial irregularities flagged. Estate proceedings reopened. No commentary, no accusations, just truth laid out clean and quiet. That was when my father panicked. He showed up at my apartment unannounced, just like my mother had days earlier, except this time he didn't look angry. He looked scared. His shoulders were hunched. His suit-wrinkled tie loosened like he'd been tugging at it all morning. For the first time in my life, he didn't look in control. You need to stop this, he said the moment I opened the door. I didn't step aside. You need to listen, I replied. He swallowed hard and glanced down the hallway as if expecting someone else to appear and rescue him. When no one did, he stepped back. This was never supposed to get public, he said. It was a family matter. I laughed softly. You made it public when you lied in court filings. His jaw tightened. You don't understand how these things work. No, I said calmly. You don't understand that I finally do. He exhaled sharply. Your grandmother didn't know what she was signing. She was emotional, confused. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Stop, I said. You don't get to rewrite her anymore. She trusted us, he snapped. She trusted me, I corrected. Silence fell between us. Then very quietly he said, if this goes forward, there will be consequences. I met his gaze without flinching. For you. He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Not his daughter, not a problem to manage. A threat. You think this makes you powerful, he said. No, I replied, it makes me done. He left without another word. That afternoon, Judith called with an update that explained his fear. They found transfers, she said. Personal expenses disguised as business costs, tuition payments, vacation homes. Large sums moved shortly before your grandmother passed. My hands clenched at my sides. So he knew the will existed, I said. Yes, she replied, and he knew the audit would uncover it. Everything snapped into place then. The wedding rush, the sudden urgency, the frantic spending, the insistence on appearances. They weren't celebrating a future. They were racing a clock. That evening, Lily texted again. They're saying Dad could lose everything. I stared at the words. Lose everything. The same phrase my mother had once used when I asked why I wasn't included in Christmas planning. We can't risk upsetting people. Your father could lose everything. I typed slowly. He already took everything from Grandma. Her reply came almost instantly. That's not fair. Neither was erasing me. She didn't respond. 2 days later, the audit expanded again. This time it wasn't just financial regulators, it was law enforcement. Nothing flashy, no sirens, no arrests. Just subpoenas. Document requests. People asking for records my father no longer had. The company's board called an emergency meeting. My father was placed on temporary leave pending investigation. The story spread quietly but steadily. The wedding scandal was no longer the headline. The inheritance was. And suddenly people remembered me. Former colleagues reached out apologizing for believing rumors. A board member from another firm offered contract work. Someone forwarded me an email chain where my mother's insistence that I was unstable was being quietly walked back. I read none of it with satisfaction, only distance. That night, I drove out of town for the first time in weeks up into the mountains, where cell service dropped and the air smelled like pine and cold earth. I parked at a familiar overlook and sat in the car with the engine off, the world wide and quiet in front of me. I thought about how many times I had stood here with my grandmother when I was younger, how she used to say, "Perspective comes from stepping back." She had stepped back long before she died, long enough to see who I was becoming, who they were. The next morning, I signed the paperwork transferring interim control of my inheritance into a protected trust separate from the company. Judith approved. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "This protects you." For once, I replied. That afternoon, my mother sent one final message. "You've made us look like monsters." I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed, "You did that yourselves." I blocked her number. Not out of spite, out of necessity. Because here was the truth I could no longer ignore. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted control back. And control once broken always demands a price. The court date was set for the following week. This time not just about the will, about the truth behind it. And as the weight of everything settled into place, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't afraid, because no matter what happened next, the story had already changed. I was no longer the quiet daughter they spoke over. I was the one holding the truth. And the truth, once it walks in, does not leave quietly. The courthouse smelled like old paper and floor polish, the kind of place where voices automatically lowered themselves as if the walls had learned to listen. I arrived early, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted to feel the space before it filled with people who had spent their lives talking over me. I wore a simple navy dress. No jewelry except my grandmother's watch, the one she used to wind every morning without fail. It felt like a quiet anchor against my wrist. Judith met me at the entrance, her posture calm, her expression unreadable. "They're already inside," she said. "I know," I replied. We walked down the hallway together, our footsteps echoing. With every step, memories tried to intrude. Thanksgiving tables, Christmas mornings, the way my voice used to shrink when I entered a room full of family. I didn't let it happen this time. Inside the courtroom, my parents sat on the opposite side. My father looked smaller than I remembered, his shoulders rounded, his suit hanging a little too loose. My mother sat rigidly upright, hands folded in her lap, pearls perfectly aligned like armor. They didn't look at me. Lily sat behind them, eyes fixed on the floor. The judge entered, we stood, we sat. And then it began. Their attorney spoke first, smooth and confident. He painted a careful picture. A beloved grandmother, a devoted son, a daughter who had grown distant, resentful, unstable after years of feeling excluded. He used words like fragile and emotional, suggested that grief had clouded my grandmother's judgment, implied that I had stepped in at a vulnerable moment and influenced decisions I didn't understand. I listened without interruption. Because I had heard this story my entire life. When it was Judith's turn, she stood slowly and spoke with precision. She did not raise her voice. She did not appeal to emotion. She presented facts, dates, signatures, medical records showing my grandmother's capacity was intact, financial statements revealing irregular transfers that began shortly after the revised will was signed. Then she introduced the letter, my grandmother's letter, the one written in her careful, slanted handwriting. Judith read it aloud, not the whole thing, just the part that mattered. "I have watched my family excuse favoritism as necessity and neglect as strength. I worry that Rebecca will be left carrying the cost of others' comfort. This will is my choice made with clarity and intent." The courtroom went very still. My mother shifted in her seat. The judge leaned forward. Then something unexpected happened. The judge asked my mother to testify. She walked to the stand, slowly, chin high, eyes glassy. She spoke about love, about family, about how difficult it was to manage everyone's needs. She said she didn't think I needed the inheritance, that I had always been capable, independent, fine. Fine. Judith stood. "Mrs. Monroe," she asked calmly, "were you present when the revised will was signed?" "Yes," my mother replied. "Did you read it?" "Yes." "Did you understand that Rebecca was named primary beneficiary?" There was a pause. "Yes," she said quietly. "Did you inform Rebecca of this?" "No." "Why not?" My mother hesitated. Her eyes flicked briefly toward me for the first time that day. "I didn't want to upset the family," she said. Judith nodded. "So you chose silence?" "Yes." And during that silence, Judith continued, Your husband transferred funds out of the company. Objection was raised. Overruled. My mother swallowed. I wasn't involved in the finances, she said. But you benefited from them, Judith replied. The judge took notes. When my father testified, his voice was steady at first. He spoke about stewardship, responsibility, the burden of leadership. Then the questions narrowed. Transfers, timing, missing records. His confidence cracked. No one ever accused me of theft before, he said sharply. Judith met his gaze. No one ever looked. The words hung in the air like a bell that had just been struck. When it was over, the judge called a recess. People stood, whispered, shifted. I remained seated. For the first time in my life, I did not feel small in a room full of my family. I felt solid. When the judge returned, the ruling was delivered without drama. The later will was upheld. My grandmother's intent was clear. The court found deliberate concealment. Further investigation into the company's finances was ordered. My parents' attorney asked for a stay, denied. The gavel came down. It was done. I didn't smile, I didn't cry. I breathed. Outside the courthouse, reporters hovered at a distance, careful now. They had learned this wasn't a spectacle. It was a reckoning. My parents walked past me without a word. Lily lingered. She looked at me like she wanted to say something, then thought better of it. Judith placed a hand on my shoulder. You were believed, she said. I nodded. That was the victory, not the inheritance, not the company. Being believed. That night, alone in my apartment, I took off my grandmother's watch and placed it on the table. I wound it carefully, listening to the soft click of its mechanism. Time, I realized, had always been on my side. I just needed to stop waiting for permission to use it. The story wasn't over. But the truth was no longer negotiable. And neither was I. The ruling did not bring fireworks. No sudden relief. No surge of triumph. No moment where everything snapped into place and made sense. What it brought was stillness. The kind that follows a long storm when the air feels unfamiliar, because you've forgotten what calm sounds like. I walked out of the courthouse alone. Judith stayed behind to handle reporters and paperwork. My family had already disappeared into separate cars, their unity finally fractured beyond repair. The sidewalk was damp from an earlier rain, reflecting the gray sky above. I stood there for a moment, breathing my chest tight but steady. This was what it felt like to win. Quiet, heavy, final. That evening, my phone rang once. My father. I watched it vibrate on the table until it stopped. Then a voicemail notification appeared. I didn't listen to it right away. I poured a glass of water instead, sat at the kitchen table, let the adrenaline drain from my body slowly like a tide pulling back. When I finally pressed play, his voice sounded older than I remembered. You didn't have to do this, he said. You've made your point. I almost laughed. Made my point. As if this had been a lesson instead of a lifetime of accumulation. He continued, we raised you. We gave you everything. And now you've taken what little we had left. I deleted the message, because here was the truth he could not see. They did not raise me. They managed me. They shaped me into something useful, quiet, reliable, and then resented me for not needing them. The days that followed blurred together. Legal meetings, asset transfers, more documents than I knew how to process. Judith walked me through everything, patiently explaining what would happen next with the company, the trust, the properties my grandmother had quietly protected for me. You don't have to take control immediately, she said. You can appoint interim managers. Distance yourself. I thought about it. For years, distance had been forced on me. Now it was a choice. I want to see what's real, I said, not what they told me. She nodded. That will come with consequences. I know, I replied. The audit findings were released a week later. Not publicly at first, just to the board. Then inevitably they leaked. Years of misuse. Personal expenses hidden in business accounts. Loans taken without proper disclosure. Risk stacked on risk masked by reputation and silence. My father was formally removed from leadership. My mother resigned from every board she sat on. The company survived but barely. And suddenly everyone wanted to talk to me. Old relatives reached out with cautious messages. We never knew. You must be so strong. I hope we can reconnect. I read them without bitterness and without urgency. Strength, I had learned, does not require availability. Lily called again. This time I answered. Her voice was flat, hollowed out by exhaustion. They're selling the house, she said. The house. The one I grew up in. The one filled with photos where I was always on the edge of the frame. I'm sorry, I said. I was. For the loss of something familiar. For the illusion shattering. But not for the truth. I don't know who we are anymore, she continued. Everything feels fake. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. That's because it was, I said gently. You just weren't allowed to see it. She was quiet for a long time. Then, almost inaudibly, "Why didn't you fight back sooner?" The question stung. "Because I was taught that love meant compliance," I replied. And by the time I realized it didn't, the cost felt too high. "And now?" she asked. "Now the cost of staying silent was higher," I said. She didn't argue. We ended the call without resolution. That night, I drove out to the mountains again, parking at the same overlook I'd visited weeks earlier. The sky was clear this time, stars sharp and cold above me. I thought about revenge. How people expect it to feel like satisfaction, like balance restored through punishment. This wasn't that. This was accountability. This was consequence. Revenge wants the other person to feel pain. Accountability requires them to face truth. I didn't need my parents to suffer. I needed them to stop rewriting reality at my expense. And they couldn't do that anymore. The inheritance paperwork finalized quietly. No announcement, no celebration. Just a transfer of responsibility that felt heavier than money ever could. I visited my grandmother's house the following weekend. It was exactly as I remembered. The creak in the floorboard by the stairs, the faint smell of lavender in the linen closet, her chair by the window still angled to catch the morning light. I sat there for a long time, hands folded in my lap, imagining her knitting needles clicking softly. "You saw me," I whispered, and for the first time I believed it. When I left that evening, I didn't lock the door right away. I stood on the porch and looked back at the house, the land, the quiet protection she had left me. This wasn't about taking something from my family. It was about receiving something that had always been meant for me. And as I drove away, I understood something that surprised me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. Not because I had won, but because I no longer needed to prove anything to people who refused to see me. The hardest part was over. The reckoning was done. What came next would be mine to choose. The silence after everything settled was the strangest part. No emergencies, no late-night calls, no guilt dressed up as concern. For the first time, my phone stayed quiet, not because I was being avoided, but because there was nothing left to demand from me. I moved out of my apartment at the end of the month, not because I had to, but because staying felt like wearing clothes that no longer fit. Every room held the echo of who I had been when I was trying to earn a place that was never offered freely. I packed only what mattered: books I loved, photos where I didn't look like I was shrinking, my grandmother's letters carefully wrapped and placed in my carry-on like something fragile and alive. The house she left me sat outside town, modest and weathered, nothing like the showy place my parents were forced to sell. It wasn't impressive, it was solid, built to last, built by someone who understood the difference. The first night there, I slept with the windows cracked open, listening to the wind move through the trees. No voices arguing in my head, no rehearsed explanations for choices I didn't owe anyone. Just quiet. I started consulting part-time, taking projects I actually cared about. I turned down offers that came with too many strings. The word no became easier every time I used it. People noticed, not in the way my family used to notice as something to manage, but as something to respect. One afternoon, I received an email from a woman named Dana, someone I hadn't spoken to since college. She wrote that she had followed the court case quietly, that she had been the scapegoat in her own family, that watching someone choose truth over peace gave her courage. I read her message twice, then once more. That was when it hit me. This story was never just mine. For years, I had been told I was too much, too sensitive, too intense, too unwilling to let things go. But the women who reached out to me one by one said the same thing in different words. I wasn't too much. I was the one who noticed. I began to understand why my grandmother had worried about me being unprotected. Not because I was weak, but because I was honest in a family that survived on denial. Honest people threaten systems built on silence. The company stabilized slowly. I stayed involved only as much as necessary, insisting on transparency, clean records, and leadership that didn't confuse entitlement with authority. When my father's name came up in meetings, it felt distant, like discussing a case study instead of a parent. I did not gloat. I did not rescue. I let consequences stand where they fell. Lily sent one last message near the end of summer. "I'm starting therapy. I don't know who I am without them telling me." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I replied, "That's the first honest thing you've said to me in years. I hope you keep going." She sent back a single heart. It wasn't reconciliation, but it wasn't manipulation either. I learned to accept progress without fantasy. My parents never apologized. They never admitted wrongdoing in words. But they stopped speaking my name like it was a liability. That was enough. One evening, as fall crept in and the air turned sharp, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea watching the sky darken. I thought about how close I had come to believing their version of me. The difficult daughter, the jealous sister, the problem. I almost carried that story to the grave. Instead, I put it down. Revenge had never been my goal, even though from the outside it looked like a perfect example of karma. People lost status, lost money, lost the ability to pretend. But what I gained mattered more. I gained peace without permission. I gained a life that did not require performance. I gained the ability to sit still without bracing for impact. And I gained something else, something quieter but more powerful: self-trust. I trusted my memories, my instincts, my voice. That trust changed everything. The night before the final documents closed, I opened my grandmother's last letter again. I traced the words with my finger, feeling the truth of them settle deeper each time. Love is not proven by sacrifice alone, it is proven by protection. She had protected me in the only way she could, by giving me the chance to protect myself. As the wind picked up and the trees rustled around the house, I realized this chapter of my life was ending not with applause, but with certainty. I did not need their approval to move forward. I did not need their forgiveness to heal. And I did not need their version of family to know my worth. What remained was not bitterness. It was space. Space to live. Space to choose. Space to finally be seen by myself. And for the first time, that was more than enough. The last conversation I had with my family did not end in shouting. There was no slammed door, no dramatic final line, no moment where someone finally understood and said the words I had waited my whole life to hear. It ended with silence. And for the first time, that silence did not feel like punishment. It felt like confirmation. It was early winter again, almost a full year since the Christmas I spent alone on my couch, scrolling through photos I was never meant to see. I stood in the kitchen of my grandmother's house, hands wrapped around a mug, watching frost cling to the edges of the window. My phone buzzed once on the counter. My father. I did not rush to pick it up. When I finally did, the message was short. "We're downsizing, selling what's left. Just thought you should know." No apology, no explanation, no attempt to pull me back in. I stared at the screen, waiting for the familiar ache, the reflexive guilt. It never came. Instead, I felt something settle gently in my chest. Acceptance. Not of what they had done, but of who they were willing to be. I typed back a single sentence. "I hope you find what you're looking for." And then I turned the phone face down. That was it. No more loops, no more bait, no more fixing. The silence that followed stretched on uninterrupted. Days passed, then weeks. Nothing collapsed. Nothing exploded. Life simply continued. I learned then how much of my anxiety had been built around waiting for the next demand, the next accusation, the next emotional invoice I was expected to pay just to prove I belonged. Without that noise, I could finally hear myself think. I began hosting small dinners at the house. Friends, colleagues, people who knew me not as a role but as a person. There were mismatched chairs, imperfect meals, laughter that did not need to be managed or curated. No one asked me to be smaller. No one flinched when I spoke. One night, after everyone left, I sat alone at the table and realized something that stopped me cold. I felt safe. Not relieved. Safe. I thought of all the years I mistook familiarity for safety. How I tolerated dismissal because it was predictable. How I believed love required endurance. I had been wrong. Love did not ask me to disappear. It asked me to arrive. The final paperwork closed quietly in late winter. The trust fully transferred. The company separated cleanly from my parents' control. No headlines, no drama, just resolution. Judith called me to confirm everything was complete. "You did well," she said. "Not many people can stand through something like this without losing themselves." "I almost did," I replied honestly. "But you didn't," she said. After we hung up, I took a long walk down the gravel road behind the house, the air sharp and clean. My breath puffed white in front of me. Each step felt deliberate, grounded. I thought about revenge again. About how from the outside this story might sound like one. A daughter excluded, a wedding undone, an inheritance reclaimed, parents exposed. It would be easy to frame it that way. But that was never the heart of it. I did not wake up wanting them to lose. I woke up tired of losing myself. What happened to them was consequence, not cruelty. The real transformation happened inside me quietly, long before the court ruling or the audits or the postponed wedding. It happened the moment I stopped asking to be chosen. When I stopped negotiating my worth, when I let the truth stand even if it meant standing alone. That night I opened my journal and wrote the last entry. I was not excluded because I was unlovable. I was excluded because my presence disrupted a story built on favoritism and control. Silence was not my failure, it was their strategy. Speaking was not betrayal, it was survival. I closed the journal and placed it back on the shelf. Some stories end with reconciliation. Mine did not. It ended with clarity. And clarity, I learned, is far more powerful. If you are listening to this, and you recognize yourself in it, the overlooked daughter, the reliable one, the person who keeps the peace by swallowing truth, hear this clearly. You are not difficult for noticing patterns. You are not selfish for wanting fairness. You are not cruel for choosing yourself. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is not destruction. It is stepping out of the role they wrote for you and refusing to return. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been erased, blamed, or made to feel invisible inside your own family, I want you to know you are not alone. Share your story in the comments. Your voice matters more than you were taught to believe. And if you want more stories like this, stories about justice, karma, and reclaiming dignity later in life, make sure you like, subscribe, and stay with me. Because silence can be a weapon, but when you choose it for yourself, it becomes freedom.